I'd like to thank Andy for the wonderful introduction, and also like to thank the school for having taken me here with the show. And since I came, I only met nice people, and so nice thing through Indianapolis, and I love the ride from Indianapolis to Muncie. I love the countryside and the rural area very much. I'm not joking. Somehow I felt that there is a similarity between this region and the Veneto region, where some of the work of Carlo Scarpa is, most of the work of Carlo Scarpa is. And I thought that would be a good sign for tonight. I have a lot of material to show you, and every time I start talking about a slide, lots of things come to my mind that I have to always decide what to cut and go next thing. So I will not spend time tonight in giving you a lot of background information about Carlo Scarpa that you can get from many books and magazines, and if you had the patience from the show too. The show follows an article I wrote for Perspecta, which is an introduction article, was I think the first one in this country about Carlo Scarpa a few years ago. And it has a lot of information about the way he works, process, and the way he selected certain themes to carry his ideas. Obviously, this man is not a functionalist or a rationalist. It's a very, very powerful creator, who's able to combine among many things that influence him, such as Frank Lloyd Wright, Japanese architecture. The most important components are the tradition of the Veneto region, the craftsmanship tradition, and the material of the Veneto region, and combined with a very, very attent eye to technology, not the sort of technology that we usually talk about in school, not high-tech technology, but building technology, down to concrete, stone, wood, and so on. So tonight I'm going to kind of pretend that you all have seen the show already or read something. You'll actually do that after. I try to inspire you and capture your curiosity by showing you details of the work. I've done this before, and it works. Interestingly enough, at dinner before I was talking to a student, talking the importance and time in design process to work backwards in what one might think is a consequential process. In other words, run ahead, look at things, and then come back and consider them. So tonight we'll do that. We'll look at details. It's not really very important for you to know where those things are and what exactly they are. It's important that you begin to feel a spirit which is behind this, and I think you will see that clearly. Then next time you look at a magazine and you will recognize the detail, hopefully, then you'll be able to set them in a better background. So could we start with the slides, please? Scarpa is a Venetian, and is a Venetian to the point of being almost provincially Venetian. He's a man who used only to speak the dialect, and you can switch all the lights off, please. Only speaking the dialect of the Veneto region, which is a very strange dialect, was formed in the Renaissance through communication in the Mediterranean, and it is much closer to Catalan dialect in Spain than to any other northern dialect in Italy. So that tells you also that Venice is not a typical Italian town at all. It's a town which has an enormous influence of all the Mediterranean, and I just tried to list some of the countries for you. Anything down from Albania, Greece, Constantinople at one point, what is now is Lebanon, and throughout the North Africa and the Spain. So the influence is enormous, and it's all expressed by fragments. And I have two pictures here. The picture to the left is really not important, but to show you that even in the most domestic, spontaneous situation, there is a tremendous richness of sensuality. The water, of course, the humidity and the water create this luxurious vegetation. It's not a warm city in the winter, but the vegetation somehow is an evergreen. And also you have this unpretentious use of fragments for history, which are everywhere, and some of them are inset in buildings. Scarpa obviously bred this atmosphere, was in it. And even what is called, somehow became the decadent aspect of Venice, like you see in the right picture. There's not really decadence in a life which is informed by water in any of the aspects. From the moment they're born to the moment they die, they have to deal with this reality. And water in Venice is a very nasty element. In November, of course, the tide comes up. Occasionally, the wind does not allow the tide to return to the sea, so the second tide adds up. And sometimes 3 or 4 tides adds up one top of another. In '67, the water submerged Venice up to the level of the first of the second floor, and Venice survived perfectly. But people have adjusted their own lifestyle to this element. Now Scarpa takes this element and turns it into an extremely poetic one by not opposing it, but by allowing it to permeate architecture, to be used in every season, and to express also a sort of an organic architectural feeling, compenetration with nature, which he certainly took from Frank Lloyd Wright. And as elements of technology this time, where we can begin to see physical connection in his work. To the left here, you have one an iron steel grid which protects the archives of the Serenissima Republic, used to protect the archives of the Serenissima Republic in the 16th century, which is not only a double layer, but also I would like you to observe how right here, this element penetrates the vertical one, which at its own turn is penetrated by this one, and which penetrates the other one, and so on. So it's sort of a svastika, if you don't mind the term, of weaving structurally this thing, which is really mind-boggling in how anybody can build something like that, but it's there. So you cannot pull it apart. There are 4 quadrants. If we start from the center, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4, in which the weaving is reversed and just turns around. So this is not a detail which is being produced for any sort of elegance or aesthetic reason, but purely for the engineering of safety and protection of that place. Few steps away, Scarpa, this is one of the first projects, designed the Olivetti showroom in Piazza San Marco in Venice under the arcades. And the entrance to the Olivetti showroom, it's very, very clearly inspired by this. Of course, it's much lighter, but it has the same character. It's a work of modern technology in a way, simplified, but also maintains the tradition and the meaning of the space. And I'll go through very quickly here, show you how in walking, just by walking the street of Venice, you begin to see details, again, of very spontaneous, unimportant architecture, but you see the clarity by which details, elements of structure take up a role in the whole composition, and one can read them very, very clearly. You see this shelf coming out in pietra d'Istria, white stone, and the brick vault which support the fireplace on the other side, and the corbelling of brick, and then the vault that goes up. But at the same time, all of this participate to another composition where windows of different size and fragments from history, they're all very normal and very simply put together. Now, I have a series of pictures on the right side, which I cannot really, I took them from a book, so I was not interested in really what they are, but in a certain way of doing things. You can see, for instance, that the creation of this doorway by interrupting a very simple pole structure and by using this horizontal element, anybody will know that if in reality this column, this post here was doing any work, the horizontal piece will not be enough to support it. So obviously these people are very clear that there is an order here, of structural order, which can be interrupted in order to denotate a new element, let's say entrance, and that is done purely symbolic by the interference with an existing structural order. And again, the moment that you begin to tie together bamboo and tree trunks and so on, and the tying expresses the technology of joining of these pieces, you may as well do it in a way, and they do obviously, so to express a certain rhythm, a certain sense of proportion in a very, very instinctive way. So there is a decorative input in those elements here, which come just as a very, very normal extension of the act of building. And so here you can see the cornerstone, which protects in Scarpa's work a concrete step, is not only a piece sitting there, and which would probably work very well if it was simply cast in a concrete base, but is also inset in another piece. So here we have a hierarchy of components, and very simply we can say that this one here is cut so it will never pull away from the concrete, and is also able to provide a seat for this other piece, and therefore reinforcing it. Now the two elements are designed with a certain sense of proportion. You see there is a straight line here, and there is a double square cut on this side, and on this side, and on this side again. So this line here becomes an experiment in proportion and scale, and is at the same time a structural invention, and also a highly decorative one. But it couldn't possibly be decorative if it was not before a solution to a physical problem. Of course, this is a public space. People will walk and hit the corner, and before you know, the corner will be broken and look very sloppy, look very ugly. And going back to this Aboriginal architecture here, you can see that the moment that the structural necessity is satisfied, they again never miss the chance to express something more, to bring their body in the game. So the structural element begins to take up anthropomorphic suggestion, and again to express with the building a connection to other forces, spiritual, religious forces, which really you don't have to do, but you can very well do if you have a chance. And the same way Carlo Scarpa in this country home barbecue fireplace, which belongs to a palazzetto, which I'll show you later on, does not miss the chance of marking the path of the smoke up the chimney by casting into a concrete, forming those Murano tile. They're made of glass, they're handmade, they're colorful, and it's telling us some story by using color and sequence, which we don't really know exactly what it is, but we see it coming back in other projects, and at one point it becomes such a relevant part of his language that we are actually forced to try to begin to give a meaning. And here again in Piazza San Marco, it's obviously, this facade is obviously a skin. You can see very clearly there's no relationship between the rhythm of this lacing by using tiles, this decoration, like a carpet, like an oriental carpet, and the rhythm of the structure. So they have no problems in separating the two at all. And Carlo Scarpa learns from this a certain way of using material and the craftsmanship of his own region. So when it comes to Verona, which is only 100 miles away, that's my hometown, and this is the Museum of Castelvecchio, which I'm sure you will have to, you have seen already. But in this sacello, which is a space that protrudes out of the main body of the museum, and it contains some pre-medieval art. So it's actually a box with a skylight, and when you go inside, it's a very nice space, very small. But on the outside, he uses a skin. And one of the important things about Carlo Scarpa, that in his desire for truth, I should say, he will adapt all the time. Every time he will change location or town, he will use the local materials. So this marble here that you see is not really a marble, it's a stone, but it's called red Verona marble. It's actually a sedimentary stone, and it has a big shell sometime in it, because this entire area used to be covered by sea once. So it comes in slab and it can be separated very easily. It's not very good structurally, but it has all this variation, very organic variation in color. So what it does, it basically makes a square tile. Then he has the craftsman to cut off a piece and inserts a tile of the same material, but this time is levigated, is smoothed out. So you have a contrast of texture, number one. You have a contrast of color, and those are physical characteristics of the material. Then in the composition of it, he will work with the craftsman. So every time those tiles are positioned, and you can only have 1 of 4 positions of this little tile within the large one, but you can see that you can have a rhythm that begins to make a checker, or you have a basic repetition, or you have an opposition, or you have a symmetry. So there is a musicality of composition here, which I suppose if you have a computer, you can probably find all the possible combination. But he doesn't need a computer. He is interested in a couple of dozen of those. And what is more interesting, and you as designer know the problem, you can certainly sit at the drafting table and design and draw every combination and maybe put numbers. So A1 is this combination and B7 is another one. But that's really ridiculous. What he will do, he will make a sketch to convey to the craftsman the meaning of this, and then he will leave the craftsman alone in his own personal culture and choice and naivete in doing the composition. So this is a case of an amazing coming together of the everyday bricklayer work and the one-time input of master of design in a perfectly smooth, perfectly non-contradicted way of working. And now we are back in Venice. This is the entry of the Corinne Stampaglia library. And the floor is same idea, as you can see. There is basically a square tile with a corner cut off. This time we're using 4 different kinds of marble: serpentino, green, red basalto, white pietra d'Istria, and again Verona red marble. This time it takes the Verona red to Venice to create a sort of an exchange. And the idea of this is like we're talking about evolution of the same idea, doesn't come anymore from Piazza San Marco, as I showed you before. It goes through the experience of the Verona Museum. This actually has a reference to the culture in Europe between the two wars. And this is a building by Theo van Doesburg. It's a private house, I never remember the name. But you see that what Theo van Doesburg did is actually he went through the physical design of all the areas involved. So he did not give any chance to the craftsmen to express their own word. The design is also done by using commercial tiles which only come in certain color and a certain size, okay? But still, we know very clearly that Carlo Scarpa was affected by this cultural input out of his land, but all the culture of the two worlds, the culture of the Bauhaus, the writing of Paul Klee, and the steel, and so on. So it's not only a culture of a provincial kind, it has this branching out, this quick runs into other places and other time in order to be able to emphasize in the right way his own work. And the tiles come back again. In the garden of the Corinne Stampaglia, this was done many, many years before this. It turned around as, the garden is actually a very constricted, very compressed space between buildings with very little light and not very interesting. The space really lacks an horizon. So what Scarpa did, he again placed gold and silver and white and black Murano glass tiles in the concrete at the time of the casting. And this line kind of runs around and is decorative and also expresses space. You have one line up to the end of this wall, then this other wall steps back about 3 feet, so you have an opening between, goes to the garden of the custodian of the house, and it becomes a double role. So physically, you have the relationship that marks the sequence of space, although not written, not told. This is all interpretation that one can physically and perceptually give. Now, this is this is the pool at the tomb, Brion tomb, which will show you a better picture later on. This picture was taken during construction when the water wasn't there, and the water is actually at this level. All of this is below water, and by now has become a universe of goldfish, oriental plants, flower, like an incredibly luxurious garden, and is a cemetery. But this time, there was mystery around this place. I was already in this country as this was built, so I really did not know. As I was going back every year, this project took forever to be built. It's all concrete, and it cost about $3 or $4 million. So I was taking this photograph, and I thought this was a great steel structure. I just took it as a suggestion of a roof piece. Then I'll show you what it became. And all of a sudden, in this interior open space, you see the tiles coming back together, but now it's a cemetery. So my first impression was, it puts the tile, so by standing on this sort of gazebo here, standing, looking around, you know that someone is dead and buried. If you feet away, you begin to look at each tile, color. You have black tiles, you have dark green, yellow, gold, silver. And I thought it might mean moments of anybody's life. The days, the months, the years, maybe one black, one happy, or maybe a sequence of some happy ones, sunny days, I don't know, dark days, whatever. It begins to talk to me as a language that I could not decipher, I could not understand, but somehow was talking to me poetically. And here what happened. I hope you will remember this photograph to the left, because you will understand better if you see another picture. But this line here is actually the edge of a cover, a roof cover that goes on top of the structure. And it's built in such a way that when you stand up in the space, it's right in front of your eyes, so you cannot possibly see any sky unless you actually put your head outside. If you stand normally, you don't see the sky. You are forced to consider this wall again. And by considering this wall, now with the water, you can see, you very clearly, you understand there is a world above, which is made of sun, of texture, of beautiful material, and also there is a world below, which is a world of reflection, is a mirror world, is the world of death, which is a mirror-like representation of the world of life, but is also, it has infinity and depth, as much as infinity and depth on the other side. The only problem is that you are not allowed to look at. And again, the use of tile on the underside of the tomb. The tomb is an arch structure, looks like a spaceship that landed there, and it's all concrete. This is actually the coffin, which is stone, is this one. So this picture is a close-up. And those lights, those tiles, which this time are green and blue, of course, not only they look Egyptian or Maya, or whatever, very, very ancient, but they're also a very physical representation of if you have been to Venice, you will see that in a sunny day, the sun will reflect on the movement of the surface of the water and cast lights, highlights on the underside of the bridges. If you look on the underside of the bridges, you will have this movement, this incredible shining of stars, and happens anytime, very, very normal. It's part of the scene in Venice. So since this structure, this tomb structure, resembles a bridge so much, I think he thought that would be a great idea to create a metaphor again, and using those tiles to reflect light and bring back the place of his origin, of his roots. This is the a space that protects a radiator, actually, in the main floor of the Corinne Stampaglia Library. And I'd like to show you a detail which has been misunderstood tremendously by a lot of people and is always copied the wrong way. This element here is not there just for decoration again. But you know, all of you who have ever tried to cut with a saw an inside corner know that at one point the two curves will tend to cross. And unless you're very careful, you'll be cutting too much and cutting too much. So the piece that you throw away comes out, but inside you will have a crossing of lines, especially if you use a mechanical saw, not a hand saw. So the technique that he invented together with the people who worked the marble is that before they will make a square hole. Now, you may not know, and it might sound very strange to you, but they have machines that cut square holes in marble as much as in wood. Is a drill with a square mortise, so it makes a big hole and then it presses squarely and it chunks away the square area around it. And that's very easy to do. It's a mechanical technique. Now, so the square hole gets cut first, and then when the marble man, you will use a mechanical saw to come down, it will avoid the problem of having the two curves crossing, because the saw will meet a void, the noise will change, and you will know that's the time to stop. Now, he has used this detail for steel, especially very much, I don't know if I have a picture here, Museum of Castelvecchio, they have steel, which has been cut with a saw, with a wet saw, and in the center, where the two curves will meet, you have a magnificent little brass insert. It's like a little cylinder, which marks the place of the joining. So here, I like to begin to show you the love and the interest for the most daily, routine-like construction techniques, which he was able to turn into poetic events. Of course, we can look at that and say, ooh, it looks like almost like an Art Nouveau kind of decoration. Or maybe this idea came out from, I don't know, some or Loss, or some of the turn of the century architects, or Mackintosh possibly. And that's not the principle. The principle is the respect and the understanding of the typical characteristic of each material. Again, now we are back in the courtyard of the Colline Stampaglia. That's the detail I showed you a few minutes ago. And here, water comes. On the other side of the situation, you have the canal with the water, which again, nastily every year goes up and down, enters the first floor and goes out. Here it creates a very quiet, very poetic, again, very oriental situation. There is a source of water right there, which is this object here. Unfortunately, I took this picture in a winter, and I never thought taking again in the summer. But water comes out here, goes through a labyrinth. The water moves. This man is fascinated by watching water moving very simply. Water creates a plane, creates a roughing of the edge. In some areas it gets a little bit faster, and then finally falls into the trough and makes a noise, and it creates this continuity. The lion is placed to watch the source. Water goes down, goes through this mechanism which has an automatic two-level condition. You can push it up and empty, almost empty the trough, or leave it in a normal position, and the trough will fill up to the top. I asked him once, why did he go to the trouble of having a double level here? He smiled at me and he says, you see, nobody knows what this is. And the water is normally at this level. Says, when I come over here by myself and I see a bunch of tourists that look around, I try to attract attention. I touch this thing with my finger, and all of a sudden you have an enormous rush of water, because actually it will be almost 3 or 4 inches of the entire space, that volume of water rushing out and making a very joyous, playful condition here, so the water runs around. This is not the drain yet. The drain is away. The water will run and then go out like that. So the symphony, the pleasure of looking at playful things in this man, who died at a certain after he's 70, and never lost his capacity to be a child, almost too pure in the veneration of the elements. And if you go to the Colline Stampaglia, remember that. Just touch, just push it down right here. And this thing is a mechanism with a pivot that counterweights and will click in the other position. And the funny thing is that after the water is all out, because there's no more pressure, automatically it will take back his own position. So the trough will be filled and empty as many times as you want. This is another version of that corner. This is the one I showed you before. This is another version of the corner protection, where here it says, well, look, I can show you how I can protect the corner. Now we'll protect it, but we'll take it away. So again, the two pieces are in dialogue to each other, and from project to project, the dialogue will continue. Steps, every time reinvented. To go up the steps, of course, the riser here, and here is the same, but you have to go up very carefully. It's very dangerous, and all of his steps were dangerous. And the irony, the supreme irony in his life, that he had to die by falling out a staircase in Japan. As I was looking at some architecture, he was walking backwards, and he fell not from a very high height, but it was enough to kill him. And it's amazing how the theme, actually, look at this. See, this is one, and that's another one. You can go up. Your body has to adjust itself to the flow of the staircase. In this way, it really plays with you. It turns your body around. This is the tomb. This is the Brion tomb, the family tomb I mentioned before. The body has to turn around, therefore taking different vantage points in relation to the architecture. So you're not really free to go there and look around. There are certain paths. There are certain places where you can go, other where you cannot go. The water will help you. In this way, it's like he's directing you into a movie of his own architecture, rather than say, just go there and look and do what you like. And this tomb, which is all in concrete, and it has absolutely no style that you can talk of, because every molding, column, joining of parts, all goes back to this highly Cartesian system of concrete ziggurat, which of course has been created by making very accurate wood forming, excuse me. And so it's primarily a work of cabinet making before being a work of concrete. And because of the purity of the Cartesian system, I use the word Cartesian to express something where the language is reduced to the use of three planes orthogonal to each other in a million different combinations. So you have inside corner, outside corner, you can go through, you can make edges, and so on, and it's all based on variation on the same singular theme. This is the tomb, seen from below another secondary family tomb. You can see that really, from a formal point of view, really has no reference to any tomb that I know, certainly not part of the Italian religious tradition. It looks like a piece that landed from somewhere, and is one piece of cast concrete. And you know, concrete, if you want to obtain a continuous form, you cannot cast it in too many pieces. It has to be a continuous work. So if you begin to see what kind of case work this was, you see beginning from there, this negative part, which is the joining of things. Scarpa was not a religious person. You never see a cross in the cemetery, but you see many things which are very close to a cross, such as this one. See? And also, all the time, the idea of duality, of opposition. The couple, the tomb is for a couple, the husband is already dead, isn't there, wife is alive and very healthy, lives in Milan. And she's the head of this very sophisticated electronic industry called Brion Vega, Museum of Modern Art, a few of the pieces they produce. And so he borrowed the idea of a tomb for two persons to play with the theme of duality, which comes up constantly, the duality of above, below, left or right, before and after, white and black, and so on. So the tomb is actually looks like one singular object here, but when you begin to see it, it's like a big bug, a big insect, which has a tail that separates in two parts. And those two beams, which are, if you don't see it here, they're foreshortened, they come out as a double parallel element, cantilever from the ground, and they're all cast in one piece. And this is the chapel, where again the use of concrete ziggurats. I use the word ziggurat in absence of a better one. I think is actually the wrong word to use, but we got kind of used to use that word. And again, the idea of a world below. And he knew the interaction between concrete and standing water, so you get all of this growth. And he put goldfish in there. So during a ceremony, let's say a funeral, you can stand here, and for a moment you can really get lost in watching all of these fish and animals and frogs jumping in and out of this. So it's actually at the end becomes a celebration of life, much more than a celebration of death. And this is the tomb for the family, for the near family. The elements, the tombstones are not here, and I'm not sure whether I have pictures here, but certainly they are out in the show. There's an irony that he plays with each individual tombstone. If you look at carefully, those tombstones, they look like typewriters and adding machines and calculators, and they're all made of stone, white marble, black marble, carefully carved, and they're actually about the size of this, and there is a name on it. And you know, Italian tombstones, usually there is a broken column as a symbol to symbolize a life which is being truncated, or a lot of symbols from the Greek, alpha and omega. Alpha means life, birth, and omega means death. He bypasses all of that symbology and uses symbology of his own, which sometimes loaded with irony. And again, the technology of concrete, he wants to build this enormous tent, I would say, structure in two pieces. So you see very clearly the foundation and the base and the wall are cut here, and this piece here is cast on a second time, and it's cast in such a way that you almost feel that it's sliding away, which of course is highly impossible considering the weight of this, but you know that it's been cast in two different times. And to let you know that it's playing with you, because here you have the impression this thing is moving away, it casts this little negative element, this void, which is perfectly lined up, and you know that that's intentional. So it's constantly a kind of an attitude of suggesting something and taking away from you. So you're forced to think about and look at, and by doing that you discover even more of those episodes. This picture is not in focus, so don't try to... this is the bank in Verona. The picture was not shot in focus, so projector cannot do anything about it. It's the same technique, but this time, instead of being an additive technique where the form is made first and the cement, the concrete is poured in, here you have Verona red marble in sections, and then as the marble is carved out. The module here, the size, let's say the distance between those two lines, is probably something close to 2.5 inches, 3 inches maybe, and is done by machine. Now here again is the man who believes in craftsmanship, adores the sensuality of the making of things by hand, but is not so naive to believe that someone can sit there for 10 years with a hammer and a chisel and carve this thing out with this precision. So he actually had the marble yard using certain routers, like actually they are very similar to wood routers, and those bands are like kind of cut away by machine very slowly. It takes a long time, but not comparable to what it will take if it was done by hand. Now the problem is that the router will have to stop at the corner because the bit is round and it certainly is more than 3 inches, so you won't be able to cut an inside square corner. At that point, the machine will be stopped and a man will come with a chisel and a hammer and cut the corner precisely. And of course, to avoid the smudges and the lines that a machine creates in the material, everything will be sanded by hand to bring back that sort of the imperfection of the work, which is done not by machine but by human. And here the fascination with another machine that cuts big holes, and he would force the marble people to do things that they never did, only for the pleasure of exhibiting what a machine can do. So this is a sort of a big sanding disc, which is actually steel, and it will be slowly cut and leave those grooves. So he thought that would be, just as in the alphabet, let's say in the language of using marble, would be an element of interest, an element where textural condition change so much and so strongly they will react to light. In time they will react to humidity, because the humidity will tend to, moisture will tend to stay there longer than here. So in time this stone will be alive. And he exhibits this piece at the entrance of the bank. This is a picture when it was unfinished, as an element which actually has no importance whatsoever, other than revealing the kind of diary of the everyday dealing with materials. And the ziggurat again comes now in wood. This is the interior of the chapel at the tomb, where the concrete ziggurat stops at one point and continues in hardwood until it comes up to a very small skylight. So the light condition on the wood is much richer than down here. Unfortunately, those two pictures are taken with a flash, which is an horrible way of photographing Scarpa's architecture, since it relies so much on natural light, but just to show the existence of this element and his interest of creating much softer shadows, much softer texture by using wood rather than rough concrete. And again, this is another picture taken with the flash. This is the same picture as before. It's the underside of the family tomb, and I'd like to show you a use of a traditional Venetian stucco, which require mixing of color and special oils within a gesso stucco technique, which can only be used in interiors. And by using steel trowel and by constantly kind of passing the knife, the steel knife on the fresh stucco, these craftsmen are able to give to the finish a very, very shiny, almost oily, almost plastic look, although very imperfect in his smoothness. I mean, it's not perfectly plain, and also subject to different color and different nervature. So this is done as an infill surface technique within concrete ribs, which were left out 1 inch, protruding 1 inch from the original cast. And this is a technique which in Italy nobody absolutely can do anymore, because the success only depends on the skill of the mason who does the work, and you cannot learn it. It takes 20 years to learn it. And I tried that in New York with some of the best people I could find in Brooklyn, and we enjoy ourselves very much, but it didn't come out. This is the entrance to the chapel. Is a half of an omega sign, enters the chapel. And here this concrete wall has been cast so to allow a negative space, which eventually was covered with gold leaf and then stucco in blue, and that's gold leaf again. And again, here the attempt is to give life to a structural elements which otherwise we only read in its brute thickness. Now we begin to feel that is not really a wall, but is a box, and not only is a support system, is a structural system, but is a strict system that can accept within its own heart some very warm decorative elements, which will completely extend and change the meaning, what we're used to think of or expect from concrete. And in this case, this is the entrance to the tomb. So you step up, and here you're facing a partition to the outside. There's no glass. You can walk through, and there are two circles intersecating each other. And within the steel, this is steel over here. Right here is steel. Actually, it's like a steel box. And on the surface, you find red Murano tiles, handmade glass tiles, and blue on the different side. Obviously, there is a gender information here. Now we're talking about the couple, we're talking about the pink and the blue. I don't know if in this country just born children are dressed pink and blue according to the sex. Good, they do. All right, so that's a universal language, I would say. And the first information that you get from this place is that this is a place for two human beings, one male and one female, and they're tied together. And the tying together occurs through the use of the Greek symbol for infinity, which is the ideal duration of the relationship of two people in love, even after death. And when you go through on the other side and you look back, you will find the same relationship, blue on the right side and red on the left side, which means each one of those circles contain at the same time blue and red, if you understand. The frontal relationship is unchanged, but the same object is able to contain the same information. And when I got married, my wife is Canadian. She said, on my ring, on your ring we put my name, so I have her name inside the ring, and on her ring there's my name. So the two rings are not the same. The name reinforces the meaning, of course, right? And in Italy it's not done. I thought it was a terrific idea. But if you go to this area, this is a countryside. This is the Veneto region. It looks like Indiana, okay? Fields in a fog, beautiful green flat land. And there is a rural tradition. There's a cultural tradition which is very, very interesting. And in one of my trips to this place, and I will go in the winter when nobody's there, and then I will go to the local wine store in a place, and I'll sit down and I pull out my camera and have a glass of wine, and I usually talk to people. I was interested in finding out what the people felt about this place. So incredibly spaced out from the Italian traditional building. And very quickly I realized that these people understand, the peasants of the area understand this far better than any professor or any scholar, because all of this language speaks to them immediately. They don't have to explain, they don't have to know. They understand the material, they love the colors, they love the atmosphere, they love, of course, nature. But the most unbelievable thing is when I ask one of these men, I say, but what do you think that double circle means? Oh, he says, that's easy. He pulled out his ring, golden ring like this, just look like this. He smacked it on this marble table of this wine store, and the ring split in two. And his wife has one like that. This is a tradition that in Italy nobody knows. It's local of that place. In other words, the ring is built out of two thinner sections which interlock, and you can, to put them together, you have to do like this and click them. And then when you look at it, it doesn't show anything. But if you smack it, all of a sudden splits, and it reveals again the meaning of that relationship, which is so incredibly powerful, the meaning of the ring for a married couple. So you can see that what I like to do is to express to you that the level of communication here, which is so highly technological, doesn't have its roots in an intellectualized condition, in reading and pulling out reference out of books and justifying those references, reusing them, but by really digging in the roots of a very, very local tradition, which that otherwise will totally be extinct through this. So that's when I start feeling that there is an importance to the work of Carlo Scarpa, and it's important that this work is seen and is talked about, because a student of architecture can learn a symbolism which goes downright into the spirit of the human nature, and you don't have to be Venetian, you don't have to be Japanese, or you don't have to be anybody else than yourself to be able to draw in your own work that spirit that nobody can take away from you. Okay, now we're going back to the green stampaglia. And here I quickly tell you about this water situation. The canal is right here. This is the bridge on the canal. This is one of the thousand canals in Venice, which were used to carry people and material into the building. So the bridge was only used by the servants when they would go in and out buying things. But the master of the house will arrive by gondola. The gondola will stop here. The steel gate will be open. And the master of the house will come up on steps. Most of the time getting wet, obviously. Because the water is up and down every day. Maybe you don't realize that. The level in Venice is not kept there by any hydraulic system, by any dam. It's the sea. Of course, by the time you get into the sea, into the town, there's very little left about the sea. There's something else. But the water goes up and down constantly. And a bad day, the water could be very high. So Venetians are used to have the first floor of their house. Of course, there are no basement. We're only talking about first floor. A basement will be constantly underwater. The first floor will be constantly flushed up and down, up and down, up and down. So modern Venetian, they have boots. Ancient Venetian, they will roll up their pants, and ladies will be carried, or they will get wet too, if necessary. So what Carlo Scarpa does here is something that was never tried before. He does not say, let's build a concrete wall so this damn water stays out and I can do my pretty architecture. He says, let the water come in, and we'll create a barrier, but very high, and then we'll go down again. So this reads like a tray. The water will come up, will threaten you, will almost come to the top of this edge, okay? But you will be on a dry ground. Everything else will be full of water, but you will be walking on this very, very limited space. Now, what happens if the water comes up? It will come up occasionally, will be captured by this tray and eliminated at the right time by a drainage system. So that will be the critical point, obviously. So this becomes a very important theme. And before I go to the next picture, I want to show you something here. You see that this is, of course, this is a building that went through extensive renovation. A lot of pouring of concrete and supporting and injection of concrete in its foundation. So at this point you can see that this arch is not working anymore as an arch supposed to work, because this brick wall is being cut straight, and he has created this barrier, this big concrete element here, which looks like an arch but is actually a beam. And he says, well, obviously here we have critical situation. The arch is not going to support anymore, so we put concrete, and the arch is exhibited as an element from history, which is perfectly okay. But then when you walk through and you go on the other side, you will see that the situation is reversed. It's not anymore the new holding up the old, okay? But it's vice versa. It's not the old now takes up, it loses the predominance. And here shows you the real trick. What we thought was a beam is actually a wall, a very powerful structural element, and it just allows the capital and the keystone to be visible. Of course, from this point where the picture was taken is the end of the sequence of room. You go nowhere from here. You just can go back. That's why the tray stops. But you can also you can step down if you want. And here again, just like you to look at the way the stone that covers the step is cast, is first is it's placed on the concrete before the concrete really gets cured, and then everything else is just placed very normal, like almost wood joinery, and this is stone and concrete. So it empties the material of its most important typical characteristics, and it creates a similarity, a continuity between material which are so different, such as wood and stone. And then, of course, the carving of the stone comes back in a way of join again. So this is remain very clearly independent of that. But that space in between is so tense because there's space of compression, and this detail here shows you how the only condition at which those 2 points, those 2 elements will become one, they come together. Now, this idea of old and new, always playing between the predominance of one sister over the other comes back very clear in Castelvecchio. When he goes through one of these gigantic Roman doors, he placed concrete slabs and stone slabs in such a way that you feel, these are obviously extremely heavy, but you feel that any time you can take the stones away, nothing has happened to the historical building. So tremendously sensitive in a way, very low-key action. He doesn't try to fill in and to kind of carve the stone to fit the situation. The two situations represent two different historical times, and he wants you to keep that very clear. But then, with the same breath, you go through another condition, and you will see that the doorway takes up a very powerful structural role. Otherwise, this wall will crumble. See, this wall is built with rocks taken up from the riverbed. That's why they're round. It's like gravel, but they're the size of small melons, or more or less, like 6-7 inches. So these medieval people used to build with those stones, and in the best case, they used to create intervals of like bricks, 2 courses of bricks to level up so you can start over again. But this turns out to be very, very strong, still there. Anyway, when you cut to go through, you don't know what's going to happen. So this now is not something you can take away. It becomes married to the wall, is very violent, is very brutal in a way, and is the other extreme of his attitude toward material. You can see very clearly from above how delicate this is. The path adjusts itself to history rather than try to imitate history or try to play down the role of history to the modern by destroying the natural axis or the thickness of the wall. And of course, the use of steel, core 10, so it doesn't have to be painted. The steel can age, can rust. It will eventually leave marks on the concrete. And that's his way of letting you experience the passing of time, which I tell you in my own short lifetime, I begin to see. In 20, 30 years, every time I go back, I begin to see edges which are worn out, color, dirt, whatever, pollution, whatever. The thing already is playing a time game as the ancient wall did for so many centuries. And here, same idea. This is one of the themes, I would say, Carlo Scarpa, the old and the new, which is expressed extensively in a show out there. This is the outside of the Museum of Castelvecchio in Verona. The entrance, you come from here. Here's the plan. You go through a bridge, drawbridge, which is right in front of a Roman road, the road that used to go from Venice to Turin in the Roman times. And you come in, this garden, this is the facade of the museum, we'll see that later, and then you will take this path, leaving this little fountain to your right, and this is the entrance to the museum. So this fountain is very, very shallow, it's probably 4 or 5 inches, and you see there is fish again, and the fish during a hot summer day will go in that corner. What you see is blue because the water is much, much deeper, so the fish will feel cool in there in a hot summer day. And this is very interesting because sometimes when there are a lot of people, tourists with children, someone will fall actually. Kids carelessly will fall into the water, and it's only a few inches, it becomes again playful and not dangerous, so it takes that threat out of water and allows water to be a refreshing, psychologically cooling, pleasant thing. At the same time, it demystifies history. This fountain is not a historically very important thing. You go around town, you find pieces everywhere, nobody even look at those things anymore. So it takes one fountain that was designed originally to be attached to something, to a building, and it still attaches to a plane, but this time the plane is not the building, which is too important to do that. It's like the wall that separates you from the entrance to the director of the museum. Usually people don't go that way. So it creates a backdrop, and it's concrete, but how? Concrete changes direction, it's cast vertically, horizontally sometimes, it's capped with Verona red marble. It has an old geometry and proportion and scale of his own. Sometimes a line is picked up, sometimes he doesn't care how. And this is not done according to rules you find in book. It's done by instinct and by drawing it. One thing that I didn't say about Carlo Scarpa, because usually that's a lecture by itself, is all of this can only be done through an incredibly extensive drawing process. There's no model making, there is no talking here, there is no discussing things, like drawing after drawing after drawing. After he died, his family began to collect drawings, and now there's an archive in the region there where there are thousands of drawings, because even as a teacher, he would just talk, and he was talking with sketch and sketch and sketch. He would go through, in 3 hours of teaching, would go through a pile of stationery paper, I used to like a rice paper from Japan because they're very sensitive, was almost transparent, but also a very sensitive surface. So he would draw and draw and draw, and all those things are drawn. Now, to just, because I don't want to deal with the idea of drawing tonight, or some stuff is out there, because it really would take away a lot. But this drawing here represents his process as a teacher. I did this drawing as a student, and I did this drawing after the museum was built. The process that he used in designing this, we're talking about his own sensitivity, his own sense of proportion. But when you have to measure each one to the 1/8 of an inch and put it down to scale, you get very close to understand that. You cannot write it down as a rule, but you begin to understand symmetry, rhythm, lack of rhythm. In school always we say A, B, C, B, B, C to understand. That's all, very, very simple at the end. But so his process of education was a process of refining other people's sensitivity rather than teaching. And today, I'm a teacher still, very happy teacher, I would say. And that's the only thing that concerns me. That you can teach, you can buy any book, you can hear thousands of lectures, but the real process is the refinement of one's sensitivity, of course, at the same time as one learns technical skills. And one of the most important skills is the skill of drawing. We call this surveying, or a thing in this country is called measure drawings. This is what they do in departments of conservation and so on. So, and you can see, like, for instance, you have to draw a section, and drawing a section sometimes is very hard because you cannot cut through this. You have to guess. And the act of guessing is an act of design. Just like the act of picking up something from the street because you like it, like a can of beer which is being run over by trucks thousands of times and it becomes this beautiful object, that's an act of design because you are performing a choice, a selection of, you pick up that one and not the other one from the trash can. Okay, I will now skip a few things which are really not too important, except this one is too nice, actually. This is the back of the chapel. It's behind the altar, and again, this behavior here has no precedence that I know in any culture. Behind the altar, let's say if this was the altar, the priest would be here. The corner behind me, diagonally, just like position of this, is broken open. And there are two doors, you see? They open up. So people who are looking at the priest also look outside in the garden. Now, I don't know really what it meant to him, but all of a sudden the bringing of the water, of the elements, the air, birds and flowers into the ceremonial room, this chapel, it's a behavior that certainly our religion, or any religion that I know, never encouraged or even understood. So here's a man, again, it's very important to remember that he was not a believer, but he believed in values that were so universal and so powerful that obviously they were religious too. So his lack of belief never bothered any priest or any religious person who went to this place, because as I said, he would be able to encompass more than just religion. The symbol of the intersecting circle come back again. This time the two circles are one overlapping another. At the entrance door, there is no overlapping, there is intersection. Here we have overlapping, and you can see that inside the green overlaps the red, and outside the red overlaps the green, and the two can coexist. as a reversal again, as an opposition, the idea of duality in opposition. And if we talk about details, the hinge is created by an element which you can see comes from a flat piece of steel, like some of those children, when children cut with scissors and then they bend in and out, so they come out from a flat piece of cardboard, they come out with actually a spatial three-dimensional situation. So here's the same thing. This was a flat piece which gets becomes red hot, of course, and then gets hammered into this configuration which allows to be cast within concrete and describe this side flat. Of course, the corner is always a beautiful issue for him, so whether it's reinforced or you take it away, that's the corner. This is the other side, and then when in the strongest part of this element the hinge is placed, because these doors are solid. This is a stucco, and I think that they are cast in concrete, which is framing steel, so they're probably 400, 600 pounds a piece. And here, this is the condition of the pool before the water. You can see how the curtain, even before the place is finished already, the rust smudges, and it talks about time and passing of the time and weathering and aging. So here we don't have an architecture which expects to be new all the time, you know. I would hate to say, like some of the commercial architecture that we know here, they expect it to be new all the time. And when the aluminum begins to decay and the glass to begin to get dirty, we almost resent it because it doesn't stay new. It would be much more simple to accept the fact that everything has a lifespan. The things are born, they age, and eventually they die, even architecture. Okay? So he says that. He says it will age, it will decay, but it will do it beautifully. Like looking at some beautiful old man or some beautiful old woman. There's nothing bad in that. It's our preconceived fear of aging that is not nice. So here you see that not only the distance, the time span between this photograph and this photograph is probably 8 or 10 years. And now is even more beautiful, because this was probably taken 4 years ago. Even more beautiful, as I said before, the amount of flora and fish that is in here is just unbelievable. And again, totally outside of the Western tradition of gardens. It's very, very Oriental. But there's something else. Now we talk of joinery at a much more conceptual level. You see that this is one of the supports of that roof, that gazebo that I showed you before. And you see that this is obviously an expansion joint, so when the thing is exposed to the sun, begin to move, it will not crack the joint here, right? We know that. So this is a piece of brass cast in concrete, and then you have a stainless steel dowel, a pin, a turning pivot, and then it goes up in curtain, which is actually 4 elements embraced together by a star-like core, which is here. But also you consider the way that this element is supposed to go up. It's been cut and then joined again. It's like a primitive mending of a broken leg. And again, the idea of something that can go up very beautifully, strongly, gets interrupted and then get going again, obviously has to do with his interpretation of life and death and the meaning that he gives to it. On top, it becomes an element of rise, ascension somehow, like an open hand, like Le Corbusier open hand. Is also a brass piece which is joining those 2 pieces of curtain through screws, nuts, bolts. But at the point in which you believe that it's like a broken knee, you have actually the knee configuration is opposite. It's like your rotula here, but it's presented the opposite way, so it wouldn't become an obvious reference. And again, other pieces, you see that the way nature attacks what we make, see? Crusts, animal, rust. The thing begins to look like it's 1,000-year-old. I try to present to you the idea of things getting old as a valid one, as a good one. This is on the top of the tomb, is an element of termination of the top ridge, so you can change level and go down. These, of course, are created with the same technique that sculpture use by making a model out of, I guess, gesso plaster, and then that is given to a foundry, and they will make a breast piece just like it by using the lost wax process. And here, remember what we talked about before? The fact that if you try to cut with a saw a piece of bamboo cane longitudinally, and then you try to open it, obviously it will break, okay? But if you drill a hole before the curves goes there, you might be able to actually crack it but not break it completely. So this is, again, it plays with us because this piece is not being cut and opened. This is cast in this position. So it's very stable. It was cast like this. But it tells us what it will do if actually we're cutting and try to pry it open. Holy water fount, gold plated, double chamber. You move this lever like an old cigar box, and this chamber opens and you put your hand inside. The symbol comes back. Oh, these are the picture of the family tombs. You can see this one looks like an Eddy machine. Those nice electronic. And here, the most beautiful episode. This is the entrance. Show you before. You can actually go on the other side, but you have to be careful because there is water here. Now I'm going to explain to you what happens here. The water, you see this big conduit which comes from the countryside. When we begin to see this thing being built, and we understood obviously this was going to be a pool and there was water here, this goes to the tomb. We thought, well, the idea here is very beautiful. Is the idea that from the countryside, maybe from a reservoir, water is brought in here. It fills up the pool where you actually go to meditate, and from here you can see across from you can see the tomb. And then the water comes in this trough. It refines itself until it becomes a line, a line of life. And then eventually, I'll show you next, it goes to the tomb. And then his explanation makes perfectly sense, but it's not true. It works the opposite way. The water comes from the tomb, comes from here, comes from this direction. It feeds this larger trough. It goes through an incredible little mechanism, which I'm going to show you next. And then it fills this pool. And this is nothing. This is just the wall of the cemetery, which is slanted to give you that ambiguous notion, which then turns out to be false. And there is something here which is incredibly powerful, because when you come up, you can choose to go on your right and you go to the pool, or you go to your left and you come out from here and you go to the tomb. But if you try to go here, you will find a door, a glass door, very heavy. The door can only move in one direction. You can grab it and push it down. It's very heavy. And as it goes down, it gets immersed in water. It disappears under the floor, and of course you can see that there is water on the side, there's water here, so it's all wet. And I was talking to some of your teachers before. A psychiatry professor of Pavia gave an interpretation of all of this, which I never look at architecture from a psychological or psychoanalytical point of view, but there's something here that I think one has to read. Just a second. It's the whole explanation that unconsciously or consciously Scarpa was giving to this sequence by making the pool a maternal place of repose, a place of actually birth. But we are talking of death. So birth comparison to death requires like a reversal of the process. So I read you with his own words because I think they're very elegant, what this man said. The body, now he's talking about the act of pushing this thing down. The body is collected intention to gain way by overcoming a diaphragm, the door. That is, the dynamic image of penetration, of a reverse childbirth, where the body takes a fetal position, aspiring to re-enter the mother's womb. The pool which contains the pavilion is therefore a motherly place, and the pavilion a place of fetal floating. As you do that, there is a system of cables and pulleys, which is actually on the outside. You cannot see it here, but it's all right there. As you're pushing down this door, you hear a tremendous noise of this pulley, which gets amplified by the concrete box. The submerging of the glass door yields a sound produced by a steel cable held out in a constellation of pulleys. The sound is amplified by the hallway itself, a thin concrete box open at both ends. It is the sound of a counter-revolution of celestial spheres, put in motion by a desire moving in the opposite direction to their natural order. It is an upside-down wail, is the solemn and deep sound of the Om, which precedes meditation. From the place of death is born the river, which ascends upstream the current of vital time and feeds the lake, which protects the enigma of birth. So all of this situation is all represented by, I hope I don't confuse you more than explain you things, but you can look at the situation outside, and if you find a magazine that has all the picture, you'll understand. The idea of death feeding life, and by creating here the metaphor of the motherly womb where the fetus rest, and the most important thing, rest in a position where can very directly look at the tomb which is across from the garden. And here is the element which you might believe for a moment carries water from outside, but then you realize that this symmetrical piece actually stops right away, and this continues and is the wall. This, by the way, gives you an idea of the landscape there. This is the village with the Black Tower, and very far away, about 60 miles away, you have the beginning of the Alps. Austria is on the other side. And here you see very clearly the situation of, from here where the pavilion is, you look across and there's the tomb, and that's the entrance. Water emerges from here. You don't see it coming, it just comes from below, and it continues. Those are the two tombs. Giuseppe Brioni rests in this one. There's the place ready for his wife. Okay, and here is that, from a design point of view, something that I found fascinating, is that it's not only happy to tell us that the water comes from the tomb and it feeds life, reverts to what we know, but it plays with the water that carries that message, and it plays in this way. Water comes very calm. Right here, that water looks like a piece of glass, you can see, perfectly transparent without disturbance. But there is a point in which there is a long piece of brass, about this long, about 16 inches. And the brass has been shaped to create a wave. It comes down and up again, and then is round. At this particular time, the water has to take a higher speed, as you know, because the section remains the same. In order to accommodate that flow, it has to go faster. So when the water comes out of that little segment, comes out creating a series of parallel waves. So the surface is temporarily disturbed, it becomes dynamic, it becomes alive for very few inches, and then emits right away the vastity of the pool comparison, and it gets calm again. And this is something, is an element that is just totally, in my opinion, totally invented, totally new. It forces you to look at the world around you with very, very careful eyes. Okay, I'm through the heavy part of this lecture, of this presentation. I'm going to show you things. Well, this looks like Indiana a little bit, doesn't it? I think it does. If it's foggy in the winter, then it's definitely like Indiana. This is very, very foggy. This is the Veneto region near Treviso. And this is the house of a longtime friend of Scarpa. As a matter of fact, was the only friend with him in Japan when he died. His name is Aldo Businaro, and he used to be the director of international sales for Cassina, which is a very important Italian furniture company. And he lives in this beautiful old building, which is called Palazzetto, which means nothing really. But that's how this thing has been called for many, many hundreds of years. Now, what happened is that Carlo Scarpa, at one point, he asked Carlo Scarpa, why don't you do something to my house? And Scarpa said, well, what can you do? You know, there's an elegance here, there is a grace, it's not certainly a Palladian masterpiece, but it's a very, very comfortable, very dignified house. So Businaro kept insisting, and finally Scarpa had this intuition of taking the courtyard and creating this series of folded planes. It's like, you know, if you fold paper and then you straighten up again, the paper still maintains a certain angle. You cannot take that ridge, that ribbing, you cannot take it away, no? So what it does, it takes these planes of concrete with bricks on it, and it puts them up, and then they fold and they come down. And then when those lines meet, he put this little platform about 3 feet diameter. And it's just a place to go. It doesn't do anything particular. Not this on the right side, and the on the left side. Okay, this is, let me skip all of that. This is the stuff you have seen. Okay, here it is. And you see, as an architect, as a true architect, it always shows you the backstage kind of business. You see the section through, which is the entrance to the house. It tells you exactly what the movement of the plane is. You come up, and then it's level, and you go down again, and you have these creases, that's the word, the creases on the surface, which makes it totally sculptural and nothing else, just a place to go. Highly geometric, and of course it relies on the existence of that bush, which is in the right place. Okay. And here we are now in a house built about 25 years ago. It's on the Garda Lake in a town of Bardolino, a place you might know because of the wine. And here it's very interesting because you arrive from above. You come from above, and the house is below you. See, my friend there just jumped over the ditch, which you're supposed to take in, right? You're supposed to go, you enter from here, you're supposed to walk, and you walk in between this ditch, and then you turn around, and when you are down there low, you're facing the house. But of course you can jump over this thing, you'll be on the roof of the house. So the roof of the house is exactly the same idea. You have these folded planes of brick with this round circle cast in it. But those circles that in the courtyard of the Palazzetto were just playful, this is the entrance. You see what kind of violent vegetation you get, concrete, which is completely taken over by these weeds and stuff. So you're entering again, it is also like a rebirth, entering your mother's womb in this very compressed space, and then you find yourself in front of the house. But, okay, you see the roof? That now, those circles that in the project before were just platform placed in the ground, now they become the top of columns. And the column, instead of growing from the ground up, this time is a negative one. First you see the top, and then you have to look down to see the bottom. So again, perception and a very different spatial conception play together in the meaning of discovery of things. And this is the column. The column is built by piling up dowels about this big. Some are concrete, some are Verona red marble, some are white pietra d'Istria. And of course there's a steel core, so they get piled up. The idea of compression at its best. And the rhythm and the decoration comes from different texture, different thicknesses throughout. This is the interior. You can see that the column outside and the column inside is exactly the same thing. Of course, the ceiling inside follows the same plane as the roof, so you have a motion in the plane of the roof. And here you can see the texture, concrete, and so on. Okay, this is the Museum of Castelvecchio. How are we doing on time? I think I'm already beyond, where is Andy? I'm beyond our limit. Well, I easily have another half an hour, so I probably better cut short. Let me see what's coming up. What I would like to do, actually, let me cut the things that might be a little bit redundant. I like to come to an episode which is very, very powerful. Well, this is the idea of the old and the new as expressed by the strong symmetry of the outside. This is the existing. So the symmetry of the outside is predominant because you don't see the mullions. This is a Museum Castelvecchio. You don't see so much the mullions and the glazing. It's secondary. But when you look from inside out, the new geometry of the mullion takes over because the outside doesn't reflect light anymore. So it remains just like an outline. And this is done, I'll show you very quickly, is done on every occasion. You see, one geometry, this is the same window, huh? One situation from the outside and one from the inside. They're actually so radically different. They're only two aspects, two sides of the same coin, as they say. This is particularly interesting because from outside you would never expect such a grand glazing situation. Okay, I'm going to skip all of this. But I want to talk to you about those windows. This is the Bank of Verona, marked by these very, very strange windows. They're very strange. They have no precedent in any architecture in this town, anywhere that I know. And you see, it looks like a circle, but in reality it's not a circle. The circle has been split according to its vertical diameter and spaced away about 11 inches. 11 inches is the module for the entire building. Now that 11-inch space is taken up by this piece of stone, which is actually a drain. The water goes, see, this is a cartilage-like. The real window is behind. This is all open. The glass is here. It's not at this plane. So when it rains, often the water goes in and it gets trapped between the glass and this very thin wall, which is all stone. So there is a drain inside and the water gets spit out. Now in a case like this, runs along a window, so it will actually make the people aware. People at this floor will certainly be aware that it's raining because a large quantity of water washes down the window and it's like being inside a waterfall. This is a bank. It's not even a house. Imagine, the seriousness of this guy is counting money inside, and the city is washes coming down wild. And of course, what happened? It begins to stain the facade, and that's what he wants. Again, he wants to talk about aging, not the beauty of aging, not the horror of aging. And the geometry, he will never cut the mullions of the window so to repeat passively the geometry of the situation on the outside. They always oppose one geometry to another one. Okay, this is Castelvecchio again. But the most interesting thing is that a window which is almost round on the outside is square on the inside. As a matter of fact, this edge that you see is the only visible part of a square thing which goes roughly like this. And it's composed, see where the joint line is? You have one piece, then you have two, then you have three, never cut in the center, it cuts at this point, then you have 4 and 5. And this element here is the one that allows the water to be captured by a hole right here, you don't see it, and then it goes down. And this situation, it's highly poetic because in one singular form, which at the same time is technological and symbolic, it repeats a very traditional Venetian element, which is to allow the water that gets trapped between the window, between the plane of the wall and the window which is behind, to get trapped and spit out. So, it's again an engineering protective device, but it has its own poetry. So you can see that the distance between this is 150 miles by road, 500 years by time, but the idea remains the same. It's the capacity to reinvent without copying, which is the problem that we have every time. we designed. We cannot invent everything because everything's been done. We just have to address the same issue again, and reinvent our profession as we go along. So I hope that's it. I hope that it will inspire you to not so much to go see his work and try to get it inside you, but really understand those forces in you which are the more poetic and the more productive, and inspire you to find a system to refine that capacity, bring it out. Thank you very much.
A question or two. Do you have any questions to ask of Mr. Zambonini? Butterfields? Okay. I have a question, but I'll ask it at Butterfields. There's a van outside, can shuttle people to Butterfields. You're welcome. The van can't take everybody, so get a ride from somebody else, and we'll get together at Butterfields. Thank you very much.